Tell by the way we've gotten going here that we're a little informal in this series. We're not, we sort of see this series as kind of the anti-webinar. We want everybody, we want to get sort of featured expertise, but we also want everybody to engage. And so we try to create this as an informal atmosphere so that everybody will feel comfortable and talking and sharing. We are recording, so if there's anything you want to be off the record, you do have to let us know. But honestly, the goal here is to foster discussion. If you're wondering where you are, if you're, usually we're not on as many Zoom calls these days as we used to be, I think for most of us, but if you're suffering from Zoom disorientation, this is a Pendleton Group and Global Atlanta's Reframing Resilience series. We haven't done one in quite a number of months, but we're happy to be resuming this. And this series over the past 18 months, really, we've been looking at international connectivity as a post-COVID, if we can ever get there, post-COVID resiliency issue. How do we retain international connections, whether it be trade or economic development or education, a lot of these industry and topical focus areas that we've covered. How do we retain this so that when we do come out of this, we're as resilient as we possibly can be? And this time we're looking at an issue that really I think is a microcosm of globalization. We're looking at these Buy American rules that really get at the heart of what it means to wrestle with how we balance local in terms of domestic benefits versus the broader benefits of global trade. We could get into really deep economic theory on this stuff, but I think our goal today is really to look at how much competitiveness are we willing to give up in the name of favoring our local industry? How much production are we going to be prioritizing at the expense of broader price benefits or supply chain resiliency and competitiveness? So we've got some great speakers. We're going to kind of back into them. I think since we've got a small enough number of people and we've got enough new people like Guy mentioned, we're going to go around and do quick introductions. I'm going to save our speakers for last so we can just flow from the introductions right into the conversation. And then we'll go from there. So it's good to see everybody's face. I will start with Savannah. Good to see you again. If you want to just do the one breath rule, name and affiliation, and then you'll have a chance to kind of interject later as well if you want.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Savannah Boylan. I'm a foreign policy and diplomacy consultant working with the Canadian Consulate in Atlanta. So I work closely with Louise Blais on this issue.
Thanks. Jacobus?
Jacobus Boers, Robinson College of Business, Georgia State University. Spent a lot of time doing international stuff over the years.
Great. Maria?
Hi, I'm Maria Boyd-Deeb. I'm with T&M Associates here in Roswell. We have been doing onshoring and reshoring very successfully internationally for 20 years now.
Great. Dorothea?
Jahaku, and I'm with Hallwood Smith and an attorney from Germany.
Great. Thank you. Michelle?
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Michel Shrabsov, and I'm the Consul General of Belgium here in Atlanta.
Great. Gwen?
Hello, everyone. I'm Gwen Tabure, and I work with Michel Shrabsov at the Consulate General of Belgium in Atlanta.
Welcome. John?
Hello, I'm John Parkerson. I'm an international business attorney at Hallwood Smith in Atlanta.
Great. Aurora? Want to jump in?
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Aurora Perez. I'm the Events and Engagement Director at Global Atlanta.
And Maxine?
Hi, everyone. I'm Maxine Beer. I'm an International Trade Manager at the Georgia Department of Economic Development.
And Melinda, good to see you again. It's been a while.
Good to see you. Yes, it's been a little over a week. Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Melinda Setenyi. I'm originally from Hungary. I've been living in Atlanta for the last 2 decades, and then I'm with PNS International Strategies. We are assisting right now Hungarian companies to enter the US market.
Great. James, a former victim of our series here.
I'm James Marlowe with Bellow Solar, Clean Energy Advisors.
Ani? Oh, you're still muted, Ani.
Sorry, I'm Agnihotri. I'm managing partner of US IBRC, and I work between USA and India and now with other countries as a management consultant.
Great. Jesse?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jassy G with Partnership Gwinnett and Project Manager for Manufacturing and Supply Chain.
Great. Regina?
Good morning. I'm Regina Maddox with Next Generation Manufacturing.
Nice. Very quick. I like it, Regina.
Yes.
Ryan? I'm assuming if you are not on camera, maybe you could at least jump in with your audio.
Hi, everyone. I am Ryan Evans. I'm the Senior Trade Policy Advisor with the British Consulate General here in Atlanta. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thomas? Or Tomas? Sorry.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Tomas Gołcki. I'm coming from, or I'm from the Czech Republic, and I represent PBS Aerospace, headquartered in Atlanta.
Nice. Colin?
Yep, good morning, everyone. I'm Colin Gray. I'm the Deputy Consul General at the British Consulate in Atlanta.
That's nice. Monica? Hey, Monica, you there? All right. Guess we'll move on to Sergio.
Hello, everybody. This is Sergio Dominguez, Managing Director of Georgia's Europe office in Munich. Thank you.
Great. And then our three, what we call, we don't call them panelists because we don't want it to be necessarily a panel, but we call our last three, we'll call them featured speakers today. We've got Ambassador Louise Blais. Louise, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, bonjour. So happy to be here. I think this is going to be a great conversation. I'm the Acting Consul General of Canada. I'm back in a role that I used to have, but I went to the UN as ambassador for a few years, and I'm back. And yes, this issue is top of mind for Canada. So really grateful to have a great group of different perspectives around this Zoom table. Thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Pendleton Group, for pulling this together.
No problem. Autumn, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Autumn McCullogh. I am Corporate Counsel and Director of Strategic Projects at NanoLumens, which is Atlanta-based manufacturer of direct view LED screens. So we do the fun stuff like Universal, Disney, as well as airports and government, less fun, but still very important LED screens. But I think our input here is primarily focused because we do put a lot of emphasis on our US-based manufacturing of this specialized product. So thank you for having me. I also agree that it's going to be a very good and timely discussion.
Yes, and we've got Tina Kimble from Novelis as well. Tina?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Patuto Kimble, Director of Government Affairs for Novelis. For Novelis, this topic is super important because we are Indian-owned, Canadian incorporated, US headquartered, with production facilities basically around the world. Good luck trying to figure out what Buy American means to us. So let's go.
Let's go. Well, let's jump into it.
Trevor, before you jump in, John is part of the panel too.
Yes,
because he's dealing specifically. So John, so you make sure you bring
I'm
him
sorry,
in,
I brought him
and
in
then,
too early. Sorry about that, John.
Not a problem.
Right. And then Guy, you want to introduce yourself?
Let's get the Pendleton voice and some ground rules, Guy.
Yeah, so again, we'll be very short because already we're in the groove. Basically, what we're trying to put here is a conversation. The conversation is kind of open to everyone participate, not just ask questions, but express opinions. And at the end of this, we will put together a recording and some snippets that can be used to review or to use moving forward. In addition to that, if following the conversation, there is an interest of people that attend to meet each other and you don't know, don't know, we will gladly make the introductions.
Now I'm on another Zoom call.
Hey, Monica, I think you're unmuted. So
yeah.
Let's see if we can, yeah. All right, good.
And my dog is expressing an opinion as well. He also needs to buy American. As far as the Pendleton Group, very short. Jorge, take that. There's a lot of noise.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm the other partner of crime in this group from the Pendleton Group. I'm Jorge Fernandez. So on behalf of the Pendleton Group and Global Atlanta, we want to really thank you for spending part of the morning with us, having this engaging conversation on something that it's very important to all of us in today's economic resiliency, particularly looking from a different aspect, either from our foreign representatives who are here from several countries, both from the diplomatic side, but also from the company side, but equally as important, of course, from the American companies that are here with us. This is very important for all of us in Georgia and in the Metro Atlanta and all the interactions that we do. And very quickly, the Pendleton Group is a group of about 9 of us professionals in the economic development field. We work with communities, we work with organizations and companies to develop and deploy business and economic development strategy and connectivities within the ecosystems. If you want to know more about it, please go to the pendletonatlanta.com and there's a listing there of the services that we provide and also our team. So Trevor, take it back to you and looking forward to all this interaction.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty good that we got in under 15 minutes with introducing everybody. So I'm pretty glad about that. So let's jump in, and that's what I love about this. We can have time to really talk to each other. So, but I think what would be good here is to set the tone and kind of the give us a perspective on where we are right now. I would imagine that all of our featured speakers at least are following this so closely that my sense or my understanding is that we have 2 separate bills in Congress right now. We have the $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, which is what we are really going to be talking about mostly today. But the passage of that in the House is being threatened by Republicans in the Senate who don't want the $3.5 trillion broader spending package to come through and are threatening to shut down the government over it. So, and right now, Democrats are trying to tie these 2 things together, if I understand it right. Louise, I know I've talked to you mostly about this, so will you tell me if I'm right and kind of give us a sense for where this stands?
Sure. Thanks, Trevor. Yes, well, everything you've said is quite right, but let me take just a step back. Okay. Many will know that there's Buy American provisions in place in the United States that stem from an act. We are, luckily, Canada is mostly excluded. We're kind of carved into the Buy America Act, so it hasn't been as disruptive. However, these bills that mostly the infrastructure bill that was first passed by the Senate and is now for consideration in Congress, that one has 200 pages of double down Buy America provisions. And I say double down because it is more extensive, and it also then has no carve out for anyone. So as it stands right now, and one of the challenges we're facing, of course, is understanding the mechanics of it and understanding how we can kind of drill down and understand where this is coming from. What I can tell you is that these Buy America provisions in the legislation right now are not driven by industry. Companies are not asking for Buy America provisions. Let's be clear. This is coming from the labor unions. They are driving this. They are drafting it. The language comes from them, and this is very much a labor movement push that's been done. And of course, they have a lot of sympathetic ears in Washington these days. And I'll just close by basically saying that one of the things that we're facing, of course, is this issue, unlike what's happening today with this conversation, has received very little analysis and profile, because it's buried deep inside the bigger issue of this bill, which is taking the air out of the room in terms of the amount of money, who's going to pay for it, and all these things. And perhaps the other thing I want to add is the Buy America provisions in the bills right now is very much driven. It drives down the Buy America provisions down to the state level. And that means that up until now, states have not had to abide by Buy America by and large provisions, but now this will apply to them. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks, Trevor.
Well, in my understanding, and our two legal experts on the panel can weigh in as well, but my understanding too is that Canada is carved out from a military perspective, right? Like you're not subject to Buy America when it comes to defense spending. Is that right?
I think it's a little bit more complicated than
more
that.
complicated than that? Okay.
Yes, it is.
But the more recent and immediate thing that we're talking about is more on the infrastructure, construction, those kinds of things, general government spending. Yeah. I think Autumn wants to correct me on something probably.
No, I don't want to correct anything.
I need it.
This is my first time participating with one of these, so I'm trying to not overstep the ground rules, as I don't know what they are.
Please feel free.
Wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Louise said about the fact that this is being driven by the labor unions, because I find that so ironic, and I would love to hear others' perspective on that intricacy, because I know from talking with other manufacturers in the area, other than the supply chain, one of our biggest issues right now is the labor market. So I find it just incredibly ironic that a bill such as this is being driven by the labor unions when we literally cannot find people to fill our manufacturing positions.
Wow. Yeah, go ahead, Louise.
I'm having problems with muting. Absolutely, I completely agree. And again, I'm a diplomat here, so I'm going to be very careful, and this is being recorded. But if you want to be cynical, it's really about driving up the price of labor for their members. So as you have a shrinkage of available labor, what will happen is wages will go up. And I think that's, although it's under the cover of, yes, employ Americans, the fact of the matter is this is not an issue right now in the United States. You have almost the equivalent of zero unemployment. So the problem has been bringing people back to work. So, but you could argue that it's part of driving up the wages. We are, I don't want to take too much time. I've already spoken quite a bit, but we are speaking with these unions. And because many of them have members in Canada too, they are, North American unions. So that's the other irony, I would say, to your irony is the same unions arguing for one thing or hurting the members across the border. So that's another irony, I would say.
Yeah. Tina, why don't you weigh in here about the way Novelis negotiates all this? Because like you said, you're dispersed all throughout the world. You have different types of jobs. Like here in Georgia, you have very cutting edge research jobs, you have headquarters jobs, but then you also have production jobs around the US that might potentially benefit from this, although I don't know if you sell that much to the government. Maybe that's 2 steps downstream from the customers you sell to. So talk about how this works from Novelis's perspective and how it might affect y'all.
Right. So it's interesting. I think the workforce issues are very important to Novelis, right? Finding the skilled labor to do these jobs in the United States. Whether or not there's Buy American, we have that problem, right? So, but the Buy American component in the way Novelis traditionally operates is we're very regional. We have these facilities all over the world, but unlike some other companies that try to integrate their supply chains across regions, Novelis tends to be very regional. So Buy American for us, maybe for our American region, for the way we operate, maybe not so bad. And you're right, we don't participate directly Buy American. This would be, do our customers have to certify Buy American, right? And they meet the Buy American requirements, and then we're fine. For us, the devil is going to be in the details, though. So some provisions, it's now removed, but at one point when they were negotiating these Buy American provisions, they actually put in that you had to be U.S. owned in order to. right? And now you're talking about, so US production is no longer good enough, US owned. That was removed, so the lobbying worked there. But those are the kind of things that keep me up at night. Not only the provisions themselves and making sure that we qualify, but these nuances, because there seems to be some kind of disconnect, I would say, in the fact that there's a globalized world, whether you're regional, which is what I think everyone is sort of moving towards, and you know, we can talk about that more. But that's kind of the push that people are that seem to be trying to do, given all of the supply chain disruptions. So regional, but then it's still global. So we periodically, even though we try to be regional, we still need periodically to supplement our supply from Europe or Brazil or whatever. And what Buy American is going to do is, at least for us, even a regional company, going to limit our flexibility. So it's great from our North American perspective, like, okay, this will help us, but it will hurt us if we lose flexibility. And so that's.
Well, I want to frame this in with regard to other sort of America First type policies, right? Because you had to deal with the aluminum tariffs with regard to Canada, and I know you've got you've got plants in Kingston, Ontario, and also Oswego, New York, who are kind of like right next to each other and complement each other, but across that border. So how did y'all deal with that, and how does that tariff issue maybe differ from this issue? Just to kind of help us clarify things.
Right. So now at least the tariffs are gone as to Canada. Yeah. Diplomacy. Love it when it works. But of course it causes a lot of disruption. So actually more relevant for us today is that the EU and the US are negotiating on those tariffs, right? And like I said, we have flexibility in our supply chain. And so sometimes we need to import from Europe. And so, yes, you can bake it into the system, right? A tariff can be just added to your price. But when you're talking about a market like the aluminum market today, which thankfully is very hot in the United States, there is simply not enough capacity to serve the market. And so all those tariffs are doing is increasing the costs down the supply chain for those times that we need the flexibility. Again, we are not a company that relies on that integrated supply chain. It's the supplement. And so, it's definitely the costs are getting passed on. So, it's the consumers.
And the markets that you're going into now, the higher value markets, I mean, automotive, for instance, is a huge market. And I think aluminum is being used a lot more in construction as well these days, if I'm understanding.
For the automotive, you have to add in USMCA, right? And that is then, again, restricting our flexibility. We serve the US auto market, the North American auto market, generally from North America. But now, so then you're gonna have Buy American, plus, for example, if there's any autos that are gonna go to the US government, then you'll have USMCA combined with a 232 tariff. It just gets very complicated, and figuring percentages is also very challenging. And then going back to Buy America, where now they're talking about putting a dumping provision, right? When you calculate, because don't forget, Buy America is not an absolute bar. You can still supply the US government if the prices are, divergent enough. But dumping, which is also something that we deal with, there's provisions now in this law that says that if you have to disregard any price differences that come as a result of dumped sales. Well, is it completely disregard? Are you just going to take the differential and the dumping margin, and which dumping margin, right? None of this stuff is easy. You're going to keep lawyers employed for generations.
Well, yeah, and I want to go to Amy, and then I'm going to go, or not Amy, sorry, Autumn, and then I'm going to go to John. Autumn, tell us about, I mean, is all this complexity the reason from the get-go that NanoLumens decided to be U.S. based production? I mean, because that, as far as I understand, that's been in your DNA the whole time. And I know that your founders had some military history as well. So tell us about that a little bit.
I think the decision is just that the founder of the company is a military, and so it was just always had a focus on being US based. But like I was saying at the beginning, some of you may have joined already, that's a nuanced answer, because yes, we are dependent on our overseas supply chain. And so I'm going to, again, leverage off of something that Louise said early on. in terms of it doesn't feel like there's been a lot of analysis behind bills like this. It feels very lopsided. So understanding that it's being driven by labor unions and being done as a way to drive up labor costs, it's very lopsided in terms of the level of dependency that we have is not simply on labor. There are components that require full manufacturing facilities that do not exist in North America.
You can't just turn on the spigot, right? Like you can't just decide one day to bring it back,
Exactly.
Yeah.
You would need to balance a bill like this with some sort of program that would incentivize actual getting the facilities and the infrastructure back to allow us to be able to do that level of manufacturing. We're not capable of doing that today.
But how do you, if you are sourcing from overseas, I mean, I know there's this kind of doctrine of substantial transformation or something, and without getting too technical, like how do you get around Buy American provisions, and don't they actually help you if you're doing production in the U.S.? So it seems like you're kind of skeptical about it, but at the same time, it might help NanoLumens. So tell us.
Well, without, I would say something that's very simple that we talked about a little bit, which is, something like tariffs. Tariffs are going to apply across the board. So those would hit every company fairly equally. Right? Something like Buy America is much more challenging because, especially given the fact that we're being recorded, I do not want to get into the specifics of our program and how we meet the requirements. I think Tina was speaking to it, or at least alluding to it. There is a constant eye on compliance and how do we do that, and we are cognizant of that, but it's not easy. So no, I don't think that's an easy answer to say that somebody that is able to meet the requirements of Buy America or some of the other programs is necessarily significantly advantaged. It's very challenging.
Well, and it seems like the name of the game these days, from a competitiveness perspective at the company level, is to figure out how to make that exact balance. How do you leverage global supply chains while still staying compliant with local rules around the world?
Trevor, can I just jump in with something, which is that in notice 2, the administration put out a Federal Register notice saying that they want to re-examine whether or not substantial transformation is something that we should keep. So every time business, finds a way, maybe, the government knows what we're doing.
Well, and we're talking about value. We're talking about where the value is created and all that. So that's, in some ways, seems sort of subjective from our perspective. But John, you're advising international companies. What are they thinking about all this stuff? Are they looking at this and saying either we need to go like whole hog into the U.S. market and produce only in the U.S. to comply, or are they hesitant because they don't know how to comply with these things? What are they thinking?
Well, I think the first step is, what does it all mean? I mean, that's old enough, just understanding what Buy American Act and these proposed revisions mean for them in their current status. For example, if you're a defense contractor of components, and there's a representative of one of those on this call, in another country, they have their supply chain where they're providing defense-related components to major U.S. defense contractors. And, part of their analysis as to how do they grow their business in the future is how difficult is it going to be to continue to supply those components as a foreign manufacturer, as an entity that manufactures the component outside the United States. So it's all part of that analysis. I don't know if anyone wants to speak up to that, but
well, do you get, from that perspective on the defense side, do you get approved at a company level or at a country level? I know that there are certain countries like the UK, for instance, and Israel that are prioritized or carved out, I think, from a defense perspective.
Yeah, I think Louise was getting at that a moment ago. There are some treaties that are outside that kind of supplement the Buy American Act, and what the way we look at it is whether a particular country is a qualifying country. So if the basic rule there is that if the cost of its qualifying country components and the components that are manufactured in the United States exceeds a certain threshold level, then it's not a U.S. domestic end product.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the thing. What the qualifying country components business is carve out is under the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement, which many of the countries that are represented on this call are party. And that gives them certain advantage when you're trying to determine how are they treated compared to U.S. companies.
Right.
It's a non-discrimination.
Yeah. But some of these bills, as we mentioned, whether it be tariffs or Buy American, seem premised on the idea, like Autumn was mentioning, that if we do enough of these restrictive things, then obviously companies will have to move their production to the U.S. And it doesn't seem like it's that simple, but I wondered if you could give us perspective from some of the companies that you have represented as to whether that equation really works out.
Yeah, that's very much a part of the analysis. I mean, it's all based on costs, economics. What are they going to be forced to do in the future to grow their business? And, you know, these proposed rules, no one's mentioned, but they're not effective immediately. You know, they're phased in over a period of time. You know, currently we have this 55% threshold, but it's going to move at some point to 65%. I think that's in 2024 to 2028. So it's a very much a phased in process. And I guess I would advise my clients that this is such a long-term thing that it's not going to have an immediate impact, but it's a factor in their long-term growth. If we keep moving in that direction and restricting foreign component companies that don't manufacture in the United States from selling to the U.S. government or to contractors of the United States government, then that's going to affect their long-term plans.
Yeah, so I think Jorge wanted to ask something or say something, and then we'll go to Ani. I think Ani had a question as well. Jorge?
Yeah, I got a question for two people in the audience that have brought audiences themselves, and I wanted to ask them if this whole issue has resonated with your constituency. One is to Regina, since Regina said you're working so much with manufacturing, and the other one will be to Sergio, since he represents the economic development for the entire European, for the state of Georgia. I wanted to hear from Sergio if this has resonated among economic developers, and has this been a discussion, or any of the companies that you see throughout Europe, if this has been raised to you. So Regina, could you make any comments on that?
Sure.
Let's start with you.
Absolutely, of course, absolutely. I will say I will put right out there, I'm not technologically, I'm not educated as finely as you all are on this topic, but I do know that it has definitely come up in conversations. By the Buy American topic, consideration for American companies, that is a continual thread of conversation with manufacturers. And it has actually been for a while. And in fact, that's one of the ways I met Autumn was through a conversation where that came up and was woven throughout the meeting. So it is there, and it has been for a while. And I, again, am here to learn a little bit more about it too, along with you all. So sorry, I can't speak to the more finer points of it. I can just vouch that it's there.
That's fine, but that's what we wanted to know, if this is beginning to resonate, because it might be worth the conversation with the members.
Yeah, well, I think there's those two layers there too, which is, if I understand right, Regina, like there's we want to do good for our local environment. Like we want to hire people locally, we want to produce locally, we want to produce in Georgia. You know, there's like this kind of patriotic aspect to it, where it's just like at that level, it's good for our economy if we have more local manufacturing. But then there's also the deeper legal level where it's like, okay, to qualify for these actual deals that the government is putting out there, we have to actually make things here too.
Yes.
And the supply chain, chain piece of that, right?
Yeah. I'm going to go to Ani, and then
wait. I just wanted to hear about Sergio. If Sergio have
Sergio. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Sorry, I'm calling you from the car today,
okay.
But I wanted to share two things. First and foremost is we are already seeing new projects that are in essence a reaction to whatever these new policies may turn into, whether it's in charging or rail infrastructure. It's starting to trickle in. If anything, the fact that the US is going to heavily invest in itself has been sort of another push or nudge for European investors to come to the US. That's number one. Number two, what I'm also noticing is the ambassadors of many European countries in the US are urging their respective companies to reconsider the US as an investment location. If you're not there, you won't have an opportunity to compete and to bid and to be involved. So surprisingly, I attended an event yesterday where the ambassador of a country was very vocal and very direct about this very policy. And it was almost forceful, I may add. But so there is a big push from both ends. The companies want to be there. The companies understand that, Buy America may just be one way to get into the market and to sort of broaden and grow their customer base. But this could be the primary reason for now to make a decision that has that has
been in the works maybe for a while.
It's been in the works. They found ways to go around it, but as of right now, the logistics don't justify it. It's too expensive and it's too unpredictable, and we're seeing local production for the local market, or in this case for the regional market. So again, that's starting to change, and we are on the receiving end of it. I could tell you that, as I mentioned, a number of the projects that have come in the last 3 to 6 months have focused on this very policy and asking, we inquire as to why these companies are considering the US, and it's Buy America. We want to be there. We want to produce locally. We want to qualify and be eligible for these tenders.
Well, okay. All right.
You.
So I'm glad that this is a problem, but we got like a lot of people wanting to talk. So I'm going to go to Ani, then I'm going to go to Maria, then I'm going to go to Michelle. That's going to be our, and I'll keep us hopefully on the rails, because I know the questions can get us going. But Ani, go ahead real quick. You've been waiting for a while.
Yeah. Thanks, Trevor. I also have a small manufacturing company, and for the sake of manufacturers who are not connected with defense-related industries. See, defense is an outlier. It should not be the main focus of our conversation here, because defense industry will find a way of doing things this way or that way. What I think is that it is very important for everyone to recognize that supply chains have become extremely complicated, very integrated, and point in case is for manufacturing industry, rare earth elements, are so much needed. Now, we don't have the mining capacities in the US. We are always dependent on other countries, and product like that is coming from abroad for manufacturing purposes. How are we going to adopt all these things into these complicated rules and regulations we are trying to focus on?
Who are you questioning, Ani? Just open it up to the floor. And
to the speakers, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anybody specific, or maybe Tina wants to take that?
I mean, I'll give it a shot. The answer is it's going to be very expensive to do it, right? You will have, if you want to participate, if these rules, continue to get more and more and more restrictive, and you want to participate in the various markets, depending on, which rule we're talking about, it's necessary to make sure that you're compliant. And it's like I said, trade lawyers and lawyers are going to make a lot of money off of this, and there's no way around that with these types of rules that are specific like this.
When all of these conversations about prices and labor wages rising and all that, makes me think of the issue of inflation too. It's like how are these things related? Maria, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to Michelle first because he's got to leave. So Michelle, ask your question real quick, and we'll go to Maria after that.
Thank you. And sorry, we have a meeting at 12. I want to react to some of the things that Sergio have said and also put the focus a little bit from the perspective of SMEs, because we're mostly talking about big companies, and the added complexity of all this is hitting SMEs actually harder than this bigger companies. It is already complicated for an SME to move transatlantic, to consider transatlantic move, and they don't do it. I mean, especially what Sergio said, okay, now we are pushing companies to come to the US. It is true in a way. With 10 companies, it mostly SMEs come to the US is first through a number of small scale partnerships, small contracts here and there. And when they see they have a big enough market potential, then they can consider establishing a production facility. It's not like from one day to the next, okay, we're gonna open a production facility in the US and see whether we can have a market there. And so by doing that kind of, by implementing that kind of regulations, you actually, there are lots of companies that would ultimately have come here and won't be there ever, but they are invisible, while you will have a few big successes of a big multinational will tell this, but it will be like there will be a bias in there. And two quick points to wrap up. We also have the discussion, of course, ongoing in Europe on reshoring and buying local and SME, etc. And we've been a pretty open continent so far, but the voices that push us to be more closed are gaining in weight and also getting inspiration from what they are seeing in the US. And that would be very much a shame, because the more intricate our economies are, also the more incentives we have, for instance, to agree on standards and norms, which are, I mean, I've spent a long time in China, as you know, and based on this experience, I'm very much in favor of the US, Canada, Japan, Europe discussing on standards and norms and having integrated economies. And this would, this kind of regulation damages the potential for that.
Well, maybe the subtitle here is a plethora of ironies or something, because it's like at the same time we want to, you know, get more commonality and harmonization with Europe and our supposed partners on these issues to combat China. We're also embracing these measures that might create more voices against that tide, I guess. So that's interesting. Maria?
Hi, I'm coming from a very different perspective. My company's put in 3 of the largest local content programs worldwide. And I can tell you, we've also benchmarked global local content programs. And I can tell you there are going to be 2 problems. The first one is, how's this implemented? Does it have any teeth? And how's it measured? And if those details aren't answered, this whole thing's going to go away. Buy American program traditionally has just been a public relations program anyway. And that's really the devil's in the details. If those 2 questions are not answered, it's not going to work. The other part I wanted to talk about is comment on SMEs. SMEs globally, SMEs that employ people, not SMEs. We've got a lot of gig workers that are underemployed, but SMEs that employ people have decreased globally over the last couple of decades. And when you very often it is due to the fact that they're cut out of global supply chains. When you go to master global agreements, local SMEs, even large companies that are local are cut out. There are ways to address this. And one of the reasons I'm attending is I'm just curious on what Buy American is really going to mean. But I don't know that anybody knows yet.
Well, I kind of maybe wanted to go back to Louise on that, because I know you've got a lot of Canadian companies here in the Southeast US that are, you know, probably going to be affected by this, but may not be the most visible, right? Like they're making things that are going to go into or go downstream a little bit. And even if they're not affected on the things that they can bid for, which some of them will be, their customers will be affected, and therefore, and it's because they don't want to replicate their entire factory from Canada into the US, because that would add a cost burden that would make their pricing less competitive and things like that. So talk about how that's affecting some of the Canadian companies that you've encountered.
Sure.
And maybe how Canada may be different in this whole conversation from other countries from your perspective.
Right. Well, just before I jump into that, because I think that's an excellent question, Trevor. I just want to go back to what Maria said and talk about a little, how is this policed and how is this implemented? I mean, the way that it's structured now in the infrastructure, and Buy American and Buy America, is that you have to apply when you don't meet the percentage or whatever, and you have to apply for a waiver. There's a waiver process, and there's only one department that processes them, is Department of Transport for the case of the Buy America. So you could just imagine with $1.2 trillion of money going out the door for projects, this traffic jam going into the transport department is going to be a nightmare. And so it already is. There's a lot of waiver applications to the Department of Transport now that never get a response.
Well, and particularly when you're talking about remaking the transportation system in favor of electric vehicles and things like that, because there's a lot of new things in this infrastructure bill that are intended to push that forward, whether it's charging stations or things like that.
Can I jump in just for a second there, Trevor? Or sorry, not if you're still going.
Yeah, Louise, finish your thought, and then
No,
we'll
I
go
was going
to
to
Autumn.
say to just quickly. You just touched on the EV, and then we'll go back to Canadian companies. But on the EV side, there is now a provision in the Ways and Means Committee that will create tax credit for EV production, right? So it means that, and there's a huge problem there because our automotive industry is completely integrated. We make things together. So if you implement this tax credit, you're really going to upend the automotive industry. And that's, to Sergio's point, is a problem because those companies already here, auto manufacturing companies are going to be affected by the limitations of that, both with Canada and obviously with Mexico. So sorry, Autumn.
Yeah, go ahead, Autumn.
It was my apology. It was you had the floor. I wanted to tie what you just said, Louise, back to, I think, what I heard from Ani's question, which so Louise touched on the waiver process, which is flawed, obviously, but and Tina spoke to it a bit earlier as well, in terms of there are, as I understood your question, Ani, you were talking about sort of raw materials that are not available here, and how do we deal with that? And you'll find in legislation like this that there are all kinds of carve-outs. Tina spoke to it about, it can be whether the material or component is not available here, or if there is such a tremendous price difference that it doesn't make sense to buy it here. So I think you will find it as we go through this, it will become industry specific, which I don't think is the intent or fair.
Interesting.
Can I just
Sure.
follow up on 1 sec? And that is just that, so yeah, right. It's going to be those things that you can get around this, but now there's going to be the Office of Buy America, right? I think it's OMB or where, I forget where they put it. And the waivers are going to be not only now for Department of Transportation waivers, but for all government waivers. They're going to be screened by this single office. One of the things the business community is very concerned about is, again, there's no deadline, right? So you're going to potentially have big bottlenecks for those things. And then when you justify those waivers, it's a lot that you have to put forward to do so. And then in the end, if they do grant the waiver, it's going to be up on a website so that everybody can see that you got this waiver, so that domestic producers then can come later and say, oh, we can do that, or we can do that, go into the conversation that we're having. We can make these changes to our production, or we can bring production here. And so there's a market opportunity for us. It's going to be up on a website. We'll be able to see that and then produce here.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of changes coming. A lot.
Well, yeah, and there might be unintended consequences for, maybe going back to Louise, the companies that are already producing here yet are sourcing a lot of their materials from their home market, whether it be Canadian companies or German companies. A lot of our trade is actually intra-company trade, that goes back and forth across borders, and it's not necessarily a new external export, right? So, Louise?
Yeah, so exactly to Tina's point and what you've just said, Trevor, the big question is, okay, fine, fair enough. You want to produce this here, but who's going to do it for you? There is a low labor shortage. So there's going to be companies are going to cannibalize from each other this labor force, against driving up wages. Great, good for them, but it's going to have a huge impact. And one of the things that we've not addressed yet, I don't think I've heard, is the impact. So now we're talking about those companies that will be involved in bidding for these projects. So that's one thing. But when you put and the Buy America applies to that specifically. However, when you have to recreate these domestic suppliers for these things that will require these waivers that are going to be as complicated as Tina's expressed, which means that you have to create that in-house, then you're creating a supply crunch both for materials, labor, and components, with the private sector involved with non-governmental procurement. So, wood is not only used in infrastructure, your government infrastructure, aluminum isn't either. All these things that the private sector, the private, world, construction companies and the like are now going to be competing for the very, very depleted supplies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's and then the other impact will be, obviously, we've mentioned about costs will go up for everyone, not just in these procurement. So the American taxpayers will be paying more for their projects. And second, it's going to put a terrible pressure on inflation, which is already in bad straits, and it's going to exacerbate the labor market, which is already a difficult one. So it has a lot of negative downstream effect for everyone.
And this whole argument we're having in Congress right now is about our debt, right? Like our national debt. But if you keep raising inflation, it's going to be hard to pay back. But the one thing I don't think we have addressed really is how do local and state governments potentially prepare themselves for this kind of thing? Because they obviously have the responsibility, like Louise said, to the taxpayer to get the best deal, but they're also going to be faced with this compliance burden to make sure that they are not, sourcing, and then from the wrong place, and also the political ramifications of being seen as, running afoul of Buy American. I mean, we've had things like the Georgia Ports Authority and DOT, for instance, have applied and benefited from waivers, where they couldn't source things from the U.S. But at the same time, like now the environment around this is so politicized that maybe they would be less apt to do so, even if it's in the interests of the taxpayer. So, John, I don't know, John, do you want to talk about that at all? Because I think one of the things that we try to do in this series too is kind of focus on the economic development angle, and maybe give some practical advice or pointers or raise some interesting issues for people to think about locally.
And perhaps Maxine can weigh in on that from the Department of Economic Development's point of view, or Jesse from Partnership Gwinnett, if it plays at all.
I'm not sure exactly how the local and state governments are going to react to all of this. I'm sure they have their same types of forces driving them to regulate and place certain restrictions. What I do know is that it makes it stifles to some extent the ability of let's say a foreign component manufacturer, and there are a lot of essential components that go into automobiles, they go into military equipment, you name it, across the board. And this reflects, it seems, a trend by the United States government, the federal government, to restrict the ability of those foreign companies to sell their components or end products, which are not being manufactured in the United States. So if you're not manufacturing an end product, I think it still can, these restrictions affect greatly those who are manufacturing end products that use foreign supplied components. It disrupts that entire supply chain, and it kind of forces them to look at what do we want to do? Do we want to just drop the U.S. market because it's too difficult to get the right percentage of U.S. versus foreign components in that end product, or do we want to expand by maybe establishing some sort of manufacturing presence in the United States. And I understand all those economic development forces and labor and so forth. I think Louise summed it up very well too.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with it.
I think Jassy had to run out, and as did Colin, but I don't know if Maxine wanted to add anything. I know you're more on the trade side, but if you want, you can take that.
I mean, I can't really speak in terms of the question about how this is going to impact local, government policy in terms of procurement. I mean, that's not really the domain that I operate in. So on the trade side, what we do at the Department of Economic Development for Georgia companies really is helping them with helping them exporting their goods. So this is really, I mean, I will say it's been really interesting hearing the conversation, because I will say, especially like Regina said, I mean, to echo her thoughts, these are conversations that these are things that companies are talking about. The majority of the companies that we work with at GDAC, especially in the international trade side, are small to mid-sized businesses. So a lot of people don't realize it's about 88% of Georgia exports are fueled by SMEs. So small companies. The majority of the companies I work with are 100 employees or less. I think about 50% of the companies our team works with are 20 employees or less. So these are small companies. They're really the ones that are the engines for Georgia's export economy, and they are impacted by these things. It does sometimes depend on the industry you're working in. We have a lot of aerospace and defense companies in Georgia. I know that one of my colleagues works with, and they track these policies very closely because, again, while mostly for our team, we're focused on the export side, supply chains are diverse and supply chains are sourcing from all over the world. So they are tracking these issues. Again, I can't speak so much to the policy side, and we really don't deal in the trade.
Yeah, no problem.
But just to confirm everything, that we've heard on this call, I mean, these are conversations that our small businesses in Georgia are having, and it is very important for us to be tracking it, just to be knowing how it impacts them. And for us, we're always looking at angles of how to help companies diversify their risk, right? We talk about the importance of globalizing your customer base, right? Because policies at home can impact your business. And if, you have all your eggs in one basket, you can run into trouble.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how much that added or answered the question.
No, that's fine. That's good. It's good to, keep it all, stay aware. And your commissioner always says when a company invests in Georgia, they become a Georgia company, right?
Absolutely.
So this affects the foreign owned as well as the, homegrown Georgia company as well. So I think Louise had one last thing she wanted to say, and then we're hitting 12. I'm good with my questions, but if y'all want to stay on and talk a little bit longer, we can. If you need to jump off, this would be a good time to do it. But I think Louise wants to add one more thing, and we'll maybe cut it off there.
Okay, my other phone is ringing. I have to jump off too. I just wanted to say to what was just mentioned, Maxine, is the issue of the Southeast United States as a trade surplus with us. We buy more from you than you buy from us. And the issue is, so there's a sort of, level playing field. And when it comes to government procurement, that's very much the case. And so just to say that there will be impact on exporters if this goes through, because we've already telling your elected officials that we are not afraid of enacting similar requirements in our budgetary plan. Yeah. So there is that as well. I mean, we're very nice, and we believe in free trade, but there is a limit. Things have to be fair as well,
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to Michelle's point, that there's going to be this tit for tat escalation that happens that runs counter to the broader trend of openness and cooperation and harmonization and all this stuff. So I'm good, unless anybody else has anything they want to say or interject. I think we might go ahead and end it here. Guy, do you want to close us out?
Yeah. I think that it's a very interesting discussion about some of the unintended consequences that can happen from all these things, for better, for worse. And it's very interesting to see how this is going to play. Following up, we will send a document that the Consul General of Canada, Louise and her team put together with their perspective on it. If anybody else wants to send us information they want to disperse, great. If there's introductions, you saw here someone who's interesting for you to meet, let us know, and we will make that introduction. And that's basically it. It was a fascinating conversation. Yeah, I think probably again, Elliot didn't get a chance to express what's happening at the airport, but we'll leave that for another time. And thanks all for joining.
Airport makes all of its own money, so it doesn't really have to deal with this.
Yeah, but
we need trade to happen. So
that's right.
you know, we need trade to happen so that we can make money. So
that's right. All right, man. Well, thank y'all so much. I look forward to seeing y'all again at the next one, and we'll go from there. Appreciate it.
Nice to see you, Elliot.
See y'all.
Bye, Jorge.
Bye-bye.
Aurora, are you still there?
Hey, sorry, my Wi-Fi, my connection got lost.
That's fine. So you can end the recording, and as soon as you put it on the